Hello friends, Ben Ochart here. Thank you for tuning in. For a lot of us, controlling algae and controlling nitrates can be a challenge. It can be a problem, especially for those of us who have aquariums that can't really have plants because you have fish that are plant destroyers, such is the case in this tank here, this 300-gallon African cichlid tank, and in my 210-gallon South and Central American tank. Plants in those tanks just get destroyed. So you have a couple ways you can go. You can go with very large water changes and also monitoring closely to make sure you're not getting nitrates out of your tap, but large water changes can help to reduce that. You can feed less, you can keep less stock, right? So there's different angles you can take. One of those angles that I decided to take recently after watching a video by the Cichlid brothers was to go ahead and put in place an algae scrubber from my friends over at Santa Monica Filtration. Now, maybe you saw that original video. If you did, I'll go ahead and I'll put a link up here somewhere, and you can watch that original video when I installed it. But I was just about to do a water change on this tank here, on the 300-gallon African cichlid tank, but I decided to go ahead and first see where I stand with regards to nitrates. And I did that because I noticed that my algae scrubber was starting to actually produce and have algae inside of it. It can take a few weeks for that algae to get established and start growing. But once it gets going, it can't help but reduce the nitrates in the aquarium. Why is that? The algae is consuming ammonia and nitrates, right? And pulling those nitrates into the algae scrubber. It's also denying those important nutrients to algae that might grow elsewhere in the aquarium. So what I was after was, one, a reduction of nitrates, right? And two, helping to reduce some of the algae that can show up on the artificial plants, which can be a chore to clean. So I would rather control the nitrates by having things like ammonia, phosphate, things like that, consumed in a controlled space, which is what an algae scrubber is. So I went ahead and I can show you the algae scrubber here. You can see it. It is growing algae. When you first get it going, you use a little black cloth to help control the light hitting the surface, that the very rough textured surface that the algae grows on. Once the algae gets going, you go ahead and you stop using that dark cloth and go ahead and let the light shine on the entire rough surface. So algae is starting to go. It's nowhere near as plentiful as it's going to be once it really gets going. But I went ahead and did some water tests before the some nitrate testing with some of these strips that I get from my friends over at the Aquarium Co-op. You can see by my scheduling board that it's been about 3 weeks since I did my last water change. And usually I'll do a water change 1 week and a top off the next, and then a water change. So it's been about 3 weeks. It's about time for a water change. My nitrates tend to be closer to about 80 parts per million by the time I get to that 3rd or 4th week. After doing the test, I was pleasantly surprised. My nitrates were actually in the 30 to 40 range, which after running for 3 weeks is actually pretty darn good for this aquarium. So I think it's starting to make a difference. Also, when I look at the artificial plants in here, they're not in bad shape. They're in pretty good shape. They're not covered in some of that bits of brown algae that can sometimes require me to pull the plant out and put it through a bleach cleaning process that I've talked about in other videos. That's completely safe. So at any rate, I feel like I'm making progress with this algae scrubber. I went ahead and cleaned it off per the instructions, right? I gave it a good cleaning, put it back in, and now I'm running it without the black cloth so that I can see if I can cover the entire surface with a rich, thick coat of algae, which will do several things. It'll consume ammonia and nitrate. It'll also add oxygen, and it'll deny nutrients to algae that might grow elsewhere in the aquarium, giving me an overall very desirous, a very positive impact. Some of you out there have said, well, algae scrubbers don't work in fresh water and blah, blah, blah. I get it. I ran one in California about 6 years ago. It did a great job on a 100-gallon, pretty well stocked African peacock tank. How can it not? If it's got a big, just a big coat of algae in there consuming nitrates and ammonia, how can it not reduce nitrates? It doesn't make any science. It doesn't make any scientific sense that it wouldn't, if you have a good thick coat of algae that's thriving in there, right? So now, second point, algae scrubbers can be expensive. Certainly the ones from Santa Monica Filtration are not cheap. They can run in the hundreds of dollars. If you have the budget for it, it's perfectly tuned. It has the perfect amount of light frequency and the perfect surface to grow algae. And it comes with very detailed instructions on how to get it going. But as a plan B, if you're on a tight budget, you can consider a DIY. So that's another option available to you. All right. Full disclosure, as I mentioned earlier, Santa Monica Filtration does send me these algae scrubbers. So am I biased in my review? I think my reviews are pretty straightforward and honest, whether I've been sent the product or I've bought it. So that's my take on the algae scrubber. I'll keep you posted. I'm going to go ahead and do a water change anyway. Can't hurt. As you know, I do water changes for things that go beyond just the reduction of nitrates. I like to add fresh water for minerals. Some people say it reduces hormones, and I love the way it makes the water look nice and crisp after the water change. And the fish also color up. They get a little bit fired up after a water change, which I think is a good thing. All right, so there you have it. Comment below, let me know what you think. Have you ever used an algae scrubber? Have you considered one? Do you have any questions about them? Go ahead and ask, I'll be happy to answer. And we'll talk about algae scrubbers, fish, food, and filtration, and everything else on Saturday at the Cichlids and Coffee live stream every Saturday at 11 a.m. Central, most Saturdays. And if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a Patreon monthly supporter. Starts for as little as $3 a month, and it helps in more ways than you know. Thank you, my friends. That's it for me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.